I say this every time I'm here, that it's been so many years, I've lost count now, but I can honestly say I've sort of missed being here, missed meeting with all of you guys. A lot of old faces, or as we tend to call ourselves, the Purane Papi Club. And then, of course, a lot of new people out here, but it's great to be back. We're really here to talk about something that keeps everybody up all night, especially if you're a game developer, right? And that is the money talk. There are often hard questions that you may not know where to ask. That being said, we probably won't answer them today. So set your expectations right. That being said, but honestly, we're going to try to talk about the investment landscape in India, how it's trending, how you should look at where the gaming investment space is moving, and how that obviously, as a developer, as a publisher, somebody who's interested, perhaps growing up, moving into the industry in different places, if you're a student, how to structure your fundamental thoughts around how the money aspect of this industry works and trends, right? So without further ado, I'd like my panelists to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Kartik. I'm a co-founder and a partner at Aream. Aream is a gaming-focused investment bank. We're based in London, San Francisco, and Berlin. And we've been very active in terms of advising companies on M&A and then late-stage capital raises. So great to be here. Great to see the ecosystem evolve, and looking forward to the discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Keerti, co-founder at Wicket. We are building the world's first cricket strategy game, an IP that comes from India, resonates with India and the global audience. Very privileged to be part of the stalwarts from the investment industry. Thank you.
And also a game I've spent way too much time playing, and money. So
Yes.
I expect some sort of extra swag, by the way.
Hi guys. Super excited to be here. My name is Rahul Tewari. I am the CFO at Games 24/7. The company's been around for a while. We are in skill gaming, casual gaming, and thinking about other new things to do. That I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit during this talk, but really happy to connect with the larger ecosystem here.
Hi everyone, I'm Salone, Sehgal, founding general partner of Lumikai. Lumikai is a sector-focused fund where we invest in games and interactive media companies. We've been fortunate and privileged to be partner with some of the companies like Loco, LOLO, Bombay Play, Studio Sira, and many others. I personally have been an operator, entrepreneur, VC, and have been able to see this industry from all sides of the table, even as an investment banker and private equity specialist. So it's very nice to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Shylaja. I'm part of Ventana Ventures. I'm the general partner here. We just started our journey, so privileged to be a part of this team here. And it'll be great to interact with all of you. Prior to starting Ventana Ventures, I was part of Robosoft, which was a services company primarily focused on delivering services to various companies, including gaming. So I come with a strong background on mentorship and forming teams as such for delivery. So hope to interact and be able to mentor a lot of young founders in the industry, in the gaming industry. Ventana Ventures is basically a gaming fund focused at the pre-seed and the seed level so that they can get started with their gaming journey. So that's a brief intro. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So as you can see in this room, we have a lot of people from the gaming industry who've built games, built teams, deployed capital, and been responsible for a lot of growth and success in the industry across the board. I'm your moderator, Sharan Tulsiani. I am the CEO, co-founder of Jetapult, which is an invest and operate gaming company. We've launched fairly recently, but I used to be at Google Play for many years. I headed gaming for the Android ecosystem for India, Australia, New Zealand, a few other markets. And before that, I've done about 20 years in the industry with MMORPGs, Xbox, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this is about getting the best out from the panel. So we will leave a little time for questions at the end. Whoever's sort of timing this, please let us know when we're a few minutes away. I can't read that, okay. And we'll then switch to questions. But, okay, first question. In all my years in this industry, the first question that gets thrown to investors is, what do you look for in a gaming company? Now, we're not here to talk about that specifically, but in order to contextualize trends, I think a lot of people in the audience need to understand how investment companies across different parameters and theses and structures, how you all think. Right? So this is kind of an open question. We can start with you, Shylaja, and maybe take it around. But when you assess a company to invest in, how do you think about these prospects in terms of how they should be deploying their capital? Right? How do you think about where that money should go, what it should do?
Yeah, I'm sure the answers might be varied because each one comes at a different stage. But where we are from, because we are focused on the pre-seed and the seed round, primarily I think at that stage they would just be getting started with their product. So largely the capital that they would need is largely for the product development itself. So a major chunk of it will definitely go into that space. And a part of it, we definitely would want to ask them to earmark for doing experiments with their marketing, aspects, because they'll need to do a little bit of experiments here and there to figure out how their UA works. And
this
then
would be UA, essentially, marketing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how we would, start it.
Yeah, I think the way we look at, I guess, early stage founders, right? And we've been in the industry for now over a decade, and at Lumikai, between Justin and I, we've seen European companies and now North American companies build best-in-class games, and I think bringing that methodology into India, what we've started, and we invest, again, super early pre-seed, seed. Fundamentally, it's about the founder and the founding team, right? Games is a creative business, but it's also there's also a science behind it. And in order for teams to be able to execute well, there is a certain form of DNA which is required by the founders so that, they may raise as much money as they can, they may have great ideas, but at the end of the day, if their execution is not great, chances are that the games are not going to be successful. So the first is insight that they have, a very unique insight about the market, or a very unique white space that they're targeting, or a very unique category that they're targeting. Now, fundamentally, in gaming, venture frameworks break down, right? The problem solution framework does not work in gaming. There is no vitamin painkiller approach that VCs like to slap onto a SaaS company and to e-commerce companies and fintech companies and say, "Tum problem kya solve kar rahe ho?" In gaming, that's not the case. It's an entertainment product. Your biggest competition is boredom, right? So in order for you to be able to build a really world-class product which has to compete with everything that's out there, there are about 1,000 games a month which get released on the App Store. How do you do that? Either you find a really good category, or you find a white space, or you find a very unique consumer insight which will help you execute on that vision.
I understand.
And,
okay.
Apart from that, then it's about, just building a great leadership team, being able to raise capital, tell the right story. And we've seen that. We've seen that with the Studio Sira, we've seen that with the Bombay Play, and we've seen that with, throughout the portfolio at the moment.
Thank you. Rahul. And you are slightly different because you're a strategic investor. If you could talk about I perhaps don't want to get into too much into your thesis now. I think we should talk about that later. But again, just from a capital deployment and how these companies are thinking about their future and spending, given that you're strategic, how does that change and how does that look?
Yeah, I think what we can talk about is, how at Games 24/7, we are an operating company, but at the same time, I think to a certain extent, the entrepreneurial spirit's still pretty alive. And we've kind of launched new platforms and funded them and scaled them up. I think what is pretty unique about gaming, and I'm sure it's true for any specialist fund or any venture capital fund or a private equity fund, is the fact that gaming companies are very different in the way the value creation happens. It's basically the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, right? It's eventually the content which defines the success for a lot of gaming companies. And if you don't get that right, if you don't get the creativity or the innovation right, there's no business model that you can strap on top of a content that would not stick with the customers. So I think as you evaluate opportunities in the gaming space, you got to get that right first. But I think what we've also seen is that as people get that innovation going, they struggle with scale up, they struggle with monetization. So it's the scientific part, the right hand side of your brain that should come into play. You should learn from experimentation. One should be able to think about designing the product that engages, retains, and delivers monetization. That's what I think the investors care about eventually. A business that produces value in a sustainable manner. So I think a corporate VC or any independent investor, the framework remains pretty similar.
Similar. Oh, that's good. Keerti, would you? Okay, so I will toss another question to you at a later time. But Kartik, you've seen a lot of these deals, so perhaps you have a view on how they're viewed.
Yeah, I think, as Salone said, it's not because it's an entertainment product, it's not a problem you're solving as such. So I think usually early stage, what you see is, and we see that sort of get reflected right at the end of that journey through exits. But you have teams that sort of broadly fall into two buckets, right? Either teams who have had an experience building a particular game or a genre, and then they identify a clear gap, and they have that credibility of having built something, and then they try, they want to start something. So then it becomes a lot of it becomes the credibility of the team. But gaming, has seen several founders who are new. Sometimes it's their first thing that they start, and yet they're extremely successful ones. So we've advised several companies like that where founders pretty much bootstrap the entire business. Now what happens is in terms of funding, the hurdle is higher because you need to have iterated through, and what particularly mobile and free-to-play, what that allows you to do is, make more progress on this, because there are investors who understand game development, they understand game design. So I think the further progress you show, the further data you show, the bar is higher if you're completely new to this. So, and what we are seeing is, early stage, you will have opportunities across the board. Every time you think that, there was hyper casual, and then there was, hyper casual mechanics used to drive traffic in casual. So the industry evolves constantly, but at the early stage, that's what matters. And I think as the business progresses in today's world, given the challenges of scaling and UA, demonstrating that you have the right KPIs to scale becomes quite important. So I think there's a pre-seed, and then that's more a Series A issue.
Understood. Okay. So it's interesting, there are different perspectives, and I think all of you are focused on very, very different areas to an extent. I don't know if you guys can hear us properly, because there's a lot of echo on this side. So I don't know if it's true for you all, but I'm having some trouble tracking a bit.
It's all right. It's not great.
So we might loop on a few conversations again, just from that perspective, but I'll try to avoid that. Salone, to you guys, Lumikai put this fantastic report out today about what the market looks like, and obviously, as gaming-specific fund, you've been entrenched in the space, you've built up a lot of, sort of done a lot of groundwork, probably have an incredibly deep understanding of what the opportunities are, how things have trended, especially post-COVID. One of the things that stood out clearly was that the monetization bit looks great right now, right? A few years ago, we were on this stage talking about India, from an investor perspective, looks interesting, but when will we solve challenge X? And challenge X was, X and Y were quality and monetization. Have we reached that point post in 2022, going into 23? Have we solved these two? And if so, what does that say for the future of how we should look at investments in the market?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think there are two parts of this. One is, is India starting to monetize? And the second is India in gaming being able to yield venture returns, right? And the answer to both is yes, but that's the short answer, right? But then obviously the devil's in the detail. Now, when we start looking at India monetization, and we released the report today, and the results in itself astonished us, right? In terms of monetization and market size, it's growing by 30% year on year, right? And average revenue per paying user in India in games now is $20 per year, which is up already from $16 last year. Right? India is adding the fastest new paying user growth. It's adding 2 million paying users per month, every month on
That
month.
sounds stunning. Could you repeat that?
Sorry?
That number sounds those numbers sound crazy.
There are 120 million paying users in the country at the moment, and we are seeing in certain genres, monetization is being spent as high as about $30, especially on mid-core games. Just crazy example, Coin Master, Moon Active's Coin Master, they've grossed $16 million in the last 10 months over a DAU base of $500,000 DAUs, right? Those numbers are crazy, right? Who would have thought that could happen in a market like India? So yes, there is movement towards monetization. Yes, there is movement towards IAP. So, previously there were narratives that RMG is the most dominant form of gaming. That's data saying otherwise. Now, in terms of is India being able to yield venture scale outcomes, we're early in the journey. Now, if we've seen in the last 5 years, India gaming has attracted about $2.8 billion, right? Majority of that has come in the last 2.5 years. Significant part of it has gone into RMG, but as per our data, we're seeing a lot more investor diversity in terms of backing other plays which are non-RMG related, which is obviously great because it's encouraging innovation, it's going to drive more risk appetite, it emboldens entrepreneurs to make bigger and bolder bets. But what it has interestingly yielded in the last 2 years, we've had 6 strategic exits which have been north of $750 million. We have 3 unicorns, with few more to come, and a publicly listed gaming company. Now, and this is all in gaming, it's sector focused. So for everybody sitting out there saying, well, India will never deliver returns, India will never deliver liquidity, if you're a sector focused fund, it's not possible to yield those kind of returns. I think that those myths are being debunked, and that construct, that belief system is now being challenged, and the data is pointing towards that.
Thank you. That's a lot of, I think those numbers are fascinating. If you've been in this industry for a couple of years, you might be like, oh, that's nice numbers, but we tend to get spoiled by looking at the e-commerce space and SaaS and being like, oh, we're so used to, having a unicorn pop out of nowhere every week, right? Gaming has such fundamental challenges in terms of, well, it's entertainment, how people spend, how people think, that this was, I think, predicted, but only the most optimistic scenarios, and we've seen a lot of that. Of course, we've been doing gaming for a very long time. Rahul, you have been, you and your team have been sort of fundamental in the landscape for many, many years. And now, as you move into setting up your own investment vehicle, one of the things I want to ask you, and for the benefit of our audience also, is what sort of triggered that decision, and also, how do you think about it? What's your thesis, broadly speaking? And finally, I think there's one last thing. Given the area that you guys have been in, there's different types of monetization, whether it's traditional, casual, RMG, differently. How does your fund think of that?
Sure. No, you're right. I think the genesis of all this within the company has been that we're responding to the opportunity. I think the inflection point has been around for some time. And we've been talking to entrepreneurs, seeing all the trends that Salone just talked about. And India has been an exciting gaming market, but I think if we don't participate in the wider ecosystem, it's not that you don't want to support with capital and expertise, but I think we will lose out somewhere, right? If we do not play that active role. So I think that was the genesis, that we really want to take that step, allocate capital for the long term, and then the thinking around was, okay, is it only capital or is it more than that? And I think the more we thought about it, looked like as people who made games, operated platforms, This could be a capital plus plus kind of a venture, just not capital. And in good times, frankly, capital becomes commodity. I think entrepreneurs today are ambitious. They're looking for disruptions, but at the same time, if you are able to partner with them early on, there could be a lot of good things that could happen, right? Some of our operating philosophy has been centered around looking at content, but also looking at scientifically kind of putting operating architecture that delivers value. So a lot of tools and technologies that we had to build early on as a company, we are 15 plus years old, right, in the ecosystem. So a lot of things which are commodity today, we had to actually just develop them in-house. So, for example, marketing automation is built in-house for us. The experimentation engine is built in-house. Most of the data science capabilities all built in-house, right? So we think we've learned something through this journey, and we wanted to make sure that we are giving it back to the wider community, and there could not have been a better way to do that but through a venture investment and supporting younger entrepreneurs. So that's really the genesis of all this. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And are you guys covering all types of games?
Yeah, so I think the fund mandate is slightly beyond gaming.
Okay.
So anything to do with gaming for sure, but other areas like marketing, digital marketing, digital content, digital communities. We would definitely want to look at esports, sports tech, and a little bit of Web3. I'm not really sure, what, but anything that we could understand a little bit, I think we would definitely want to take a look at that.
I love that sentiment because I think we're finally back into a time where, I don't know about you guys, but it's sort of okay to say, I don't know about Web3. Because it felt like last year, you couldn't say that. Like the moment you were like, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, like, oh no, it's the future. And then of course, earlier this year happened. So, no, but you're right, there's a lot to cover and it's great to see that. One of the reasons I wanted to ask this was because when we talk about the investment landscape itself maturing, right? There is the industry, the game developers and publishers that mature, but the investment landscape run by also incredibly smart people that are armed with lots of data. As you see more and more types of funds come in, more players enter the market, strategics, VCs, someday Ps, I don't know, all of these funky acronyms that honestly I didn't understand a year ago or 2 years ago coming in. It is a demonstrated confidence of the market moving from this could be something interesting, there's some potential to, it's definitely there, how do we find it? That's perhaps if you're a developer and publisher, how to think about what's out there in terms of opportunity, in terms of capital, and also perhaps spend some time understanding what the differences between those are because they're now available to an extent in India. Speaking of capital being available in India and the gaming ecosystem, Keerti, I'm not going to push you on any other questions, but I wanted to ask you as a actually, do you want to lead anything or should I just go ahead?
All right, I thought I'll touch upon the topic about the monetization potential in India. So when we started out, the idea was if you look at India, it's a very entertainment-hungry market. You have truck drivers spending 50 rupees or 100 rupees on Hello Tunes to people actually buying tickets to attend IPL matches. So that's actually a great demonstration and validation that when it comes to entertainment, Indians don't think much. And what is gaming? Gaming is just putting that entertainment out in a digital format. And the moment you have like 1 billion users, smartphone penetration, internet, monetization in games has to be inevitable. And we believe that, it's not about being number 3 or number 4 in the world. India can actually be number 1 when it comes to monetization through games. So yeah, that's been our belief. And I think one great advantage has been that the market is evolving so fast that a lot of inhibitions are getting proven to be wrong. Things like people will spend if they get money. No, we have PUBG, we have Clash of Clans, several examples quoted by Salone. So these are the things that are actually moving so fast, and that works in the gaming sector, where you don't have to wait for a long time to see the data prove that people are out there, they're ready to spend. Just give them the content that resonates with them.
No, thank you, Keerti. I'm just going to lean a little bit more because you spoke about monetization. We worked together in different capacities for many years. And one thing that's almost stunned me is that cricket is an interesting genre. You guys have driven like super impressive ARPUs in the past. You're doing something based on strategy that I think a lot of people didn't think was possible. But one of the questions, from the investment landscape has always been, as capital gets allocated, one of the struggles, even with generous allocation, was that in order for games and studios, whether it's on the development side or publishing or combined, has been up-leveling their game. India has, in the past, been seen to have a studio-level quality problem, right, which has sort of made the monetization problem worse. And one of the most common things that's been brought up is the quality of talent in terms of hiring, in terms of, that you're going to just pay a lot more than perhaps reasonable and stuff like that. But of course, you guys did it very well. We're seeing a general shift in the landscape. Has Indian gaming talent, in your opinion, leveled up? Right? Developers, analysts, everything.
Yeah. So I think 5 years back, I graduated from ISB. And I remember people just talked about fintech and edtech. Nobody looked at gaming as even a serious sector where they would pursue a career. And that has changed so much. And that's when the ecosystem has evolved, there is awareness. People can understand that gaming is actually so much more challenging. You're talking about something which is right at the top-notch technology challenges because you're dealing with millions of people using it at the same time. And then you have an extreme challenge of how to create that emotion, how to create that art. And with so much of hype and talk coming about it, I'm happy that at least people are looking at gaming as a serious career option. And I do remember that, when we had some of our initial hires, their parents came down because they were curious that, okay, my son is a computer science engineer and he wants to be in gaming. So I think a lot of that is evolving.
Did they wonder if you scammed him? Like, they're like, oh, come here, work, and they're making you just do some other work. Like, oh, what is gaming?
So yeah, so I think for us, it was not just about pitching to investors, we were pitching to parents.
Is that easier now in terms of the people that you're hiring today? Do you see them more prepared to deliver what you need?
Yes, because now what has happened is people whom you're hiring, they're actually people who have played mobile games for 5 years. We're talking to engineers who started playing Clash of Clans when they were in 10th and 9th. Right? So their understanding of the product is so bang on. They understand what is immersion, what is community, what is meant by, being social in the game. So that, I think, has got tremendous shift from where it was 5 years back.
Yeah.
And the kind of culture that you set in the company, right? So if you become data-driven, you know what is fun, then the people who come in, they may be smart. They may not bring in experience, but with the team culture, with their smartness, they are able to gel.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of awareness has actually gotten people looking at gaming as a billion-dollar business, not just for investment, but something where you build a career and feel proud about.
Yeah, and you guys have done incredibly well, so congratulations on that. I'm going to throw another question, but before that, just want to say this. You made me think of something that we always looked at an inflection point in the industry, in the gaming industry. Devices, geo, pricing. However, if you look back, and this is, again, just my view on sort of macro trends globally, right? If you look at global markets where they sort of triggered out, it's been, I think, a talent issue in terms of people having played games that were available, games that could be played by that population, right? In India, a lot of gaming people, if you look at the studios run even by yourself and other, I'm sure a lot of teams that you've spoken to, they're run by PC gamers who are perhaps at some level part of the higher income because they had PCs in 1990, and they had internet connections in 2001. So they built for that audience. And now with mobile gaming being sort of fundamental to the ecosystem, those people entering the workplace across the board, right, across the socioeconomic spectrum, to design for what you know, to monetize for what you know, is a lot easier than to monetize for like a hypothetical behavior that you haven't experienced yourself. So we're going to see a lot of that. I think some of the most successful games in India have already shown that. But in my opinion, we're at a development trigger point. We're going to see a lot more games made for India that will monetize in India. But, yeah, any views on that in general, or I can ask a specific question?
I was actually just going to say, I think, if you look at how organizations are set up through COVID with remote working and so on, I think we've seen this play out in other gaming ecosystems, whether you talk about Finland or Israel or, it's usually there is some strength, like Israel, you have Moon Active, for example, but that, predates the knowledge of ad networks, for example. So they have these, whether it's Playtika or Moon Active and so on, are extremely good at, analytics. They use that to drive more monetization, drive better value. So I think today, if you are building an interesting game and you need to plug gaps, actually there is a global pool that's available, which, we are seeing, whether it's European studios needing somebody from the US or US studios utilizing someone from Eastern Europe, because let's say certain gaming companies have been, that's the beauty about gaming, it is very global. So I think today you can plug those gaps, and as you hit these challenges, you need, let's say, some specific UA competence. You can go beyond what you have in India to address it, and I think that's hopefully will accelerate things more than anything else. I think the key is starting with the right game and getting that to a certain scale. So,
yeah, and I just add to that. Incidentally, Kartik and I exchanged messages about a week back, right, exactly on this, about talent hubs, which end up originating gaming companies. And we've seen this evolution in market after market. We saw this in Finland, we saw this in Turkey, we saw this in Vietnam, and at Lumikai now we've seen about north of 1,200 companies, and we're starting to see these entrepreneurs come from these hubs, right? Zynga being one, GSN being one, and now some of these companies which have exited and had seen strategic exits, you're now suddenly seeing experienced product managers and GMs and game designers now come out of those and start embarking on their entrepreneurial journeys. All of it has been made possible, obviously, because there's a lot more capital available in the market and gaming is now becoming a real sunrise sector. But every ecosystem always eventually starts like this, right? It's no different from what we've seen even in the West.
But, building on what you started off with, and sort of, just to play a little bit of see there's a counterpoint here, right? And if you're looking at the dissemination of talent pools, right? We're looking at a breakdown, and we're looking at sort of perhaps a creation of sort of virtual talent pools or being able to work globally. Indian studios being able to do that, bring in the best talent, not required to be built out of one market, which means that the thought process can be wider, broader, have better ideas. The opposite is also true, that you have, global talent or global teams that come in and dominate potentially the market, which is still, I wouldn't say in its infancy, but definitely at a relatively early stage. And perhaps this is then a question that even with consumer spend today, and perhaps we can keep this open, whether it's an estimation, whether we know it, whether we're thinking about it in some way, how much of that Indian consumer spend is captured by Indian studios? And why do you think it is the way it is? Or where do you see it going rather than that?
Yeah. Well, we have some data about it. So look, I mean, we have some data about it, but what you have to realize, like if, we don't like to do too many comparisons between India and China, right? But however, in 2004, if you were to look back and look at China, right? 60% of revenues in China and 70% of games downloads came from foreign titles. It was a complete import market as compared to what you would actually believe, right? And The Legend of Mir, which was a South Korean title, was actually the top grossing title in China. 3 years, right? A lot of macroeconomic inflection points happened. Companies went public, a lot of capital get infused, strategic exits, a smart 3G proliferation, smartphone proliferation. The CCP launched a campaign of build games for China, in China. In 2007, 70% of revenues came from domestic IP. The pivot took 3 years, right? So this is a similar inflection point that we're seeing at this moment, right? Indians have started to monetize. Indian gamers have started to become sophisticated. Game formats that we previously thought were unplayable, unmonetizable in India are actually now monetizing. Liquidity is coming in, capital is coming in. It will take some time for domestic developers to start building to that quality and actually building original IP. I mean, Hitwicket's a great example for that, right? There are more and more studios emerging, embarking on those visions. So give it some time. Maybe it's not 3 years, but that's our thesis essentially of where the market is going to go. We see an increased proclivity for users to play India-first games, India-themed games. So it's a matter of supply, and demand is definitely there.
I think what I also think is that the cost of innovation has come down dramatically. I think the advantage that some of the Western studios had or overseas studios had was just the cost of creating, some of this very deep content. And I mean, the Indian developers didn't really have that capital or the wherewithal to actually get there. But I think that's started to change in favor of the domestic industry here. And apart from that, I think the content creation has become borderless. I think what Indians are also, and we've done that same thing in our casual gaming studio, is to co-create along with, the best talent out there. Knowing very well that, we can create that content for India, or we can actually take that content outside of India. So I think the real opportunity for the industry is to create games, definitely IP for Indians, but eventually, think about taking, our talent, our capability outside of India. Indians are great storytellers. We're good at technology. Eventually, I think we'll crack it.
I was just going to add that, certainly if you look at mobile, right, popularity of certain games here is actually beneficial because the big part is, let's say, merge games. Now, clearly, when the first game comes, there's a learning curve, and at some point it gets popularity. Then, the mechanic gets established. And then there's innovation just building on that, right? You're not trying to complicate this for the user. So you've seen waves through this. So actually, certain games being more popular is sort of giving you validation of what people are willing to pay for. And then you can innovate in terms of the right game, right? So I think that's the opportunity that certainly exists. And I think a bit like back to the point Salone made around China, the first wave was a lot of Chinese developers in China built for China, right? Now, if you look at it, they built for China, but with the ability to launch globally. That didn't happen overnight. Initially, they had a market, large enough market to serve. But today, if you look at it, there are lots of, certainly if you look at some of the mid-core strategy and so on, it's a lot of studios out of China that are building for the West, and it works perfectly well, right? So I think we should see that as a positive if you see certain games coming through, because that gives you, incrementally, there's less of a risk if you're starting off to build a game, because you know certain things work. And then you can take those as assumptions and then build on top of that.
Understood. Shylaja, you've been, before, setting up your fund and running it, you've been on the development side, running a studio for a very long time, and you guys have focused a lot on going global, having a high-quality global game out of India. But going forward, how do you see sort of flipping that into the market, right? Bringing that quality? One of the things he said is, if you build something global, is it that easy to then translate that or bring it into for India?
I think, it all depends on what, the founders have as a vision. And if they think that their gaming content is meant for global consumption, they should focus on that. So a lot depends on what the content is all about. And if the content is appealing to the Indian audience, they should definitely, focus on that and, build on top of that. But otherwise, I think it doesn't really matter. I think it all depends on the content that we are working on. And today, I think we are seeing a lot more focus on the Indian content. There's a lot of pride that I think we all associate with India, culture. That's changing over a period of time. So there is a lot of potential to build IPs around these aspects also. We see a lot of announcements happening around that. So that's good to know.
That's cool. Thank you. So I want to try to ask a slightly different question. We've been talking about the ecosystem and, both from the developer side and how you as investors look at it. But from a, let me set this up this way. From a perhaps responsibility or something that the investment ecosystem could do for the industry at a larger level, right? One of the things that we see a gap in is the way traditional, or not traditional, but the general startup ecosystem, so everything from your, again, like D2C, e-com, or whatever, SaaS, especially SaaS because it does pride itself on a scientific sort of basis. They seem to be really prepared. These companies, these founders, seem to be really prepared when they face, different sources of capital. They kind of know what they tend to seem to know what they're getting into. They seem to have very solid business plans. They even typically know when and why and how to bring in the right kind of capital. The sense we've felt in years in forums like this is there seems to be this gap between perhaps what the larger media hubbub around, this guy raised $1 billion, this guy raised $500 million. It seems to create these weird expectations. And I think that a lot of that is leaked into gaming. Right? One of the things the investment ecosystem obviously benefits from is if there is a better matching of expectations versus what the capital is and what it can be used for. Is there something that we could do or we should do to kind of bridge that gap? And what would you think that would be, or what areas do you think that would be? Just from an education, knowledge, expectation perspective.
So I think, if I look back, early 2012 was sort of when mobile and free-to-play and all of that started growing. But the reality is, Salone was at LVP, which is one of the early-stage gaming-focused investors. But even if you go back to 2017, 18, there were very few gaming-focused early-stage funds, right? And today, if you look at it, it's a very different landscape. And a lot of those funds actually have people with former gaming experience who understand what it takes. And things like retention, what's important, will a game work, what are some of the early KPIs. I think that has gotten, even for me, watching that evolve, today there's a lot more available than there was just a few years ago, right? So I think part of it is already happening here with specialist funds, because we see this all the time. Even with late stage, you have more data and numbers and so on, but at the early stage, this is very different to other sectors. So I think first is, looks like it's already happening in this ecosystem. Just here we have 2 investors with experience in the sector. Second is, I think you can leverage a lot of what is also being created, by many of the early stage funds globally, because I think those things matter, right? Second is, I think what has worked really well, certainly Europe, US, and some of these hubs, or even places like Israel, Turkey, and so on, is this first wave of successful exits has then allowed many angels who are from the industry to then start investing. And I think that it looks like, here we advise Play Simple on their sale to MTG, Moonfrog, Stillfront. So there's already a cohort of companies who have gone through this. So, I think that is also going to help bridge that gap, if you will. And then I think, corporates, as you're seeing here, are also taking a more active role in deploying capital. Historically, it used to just be corporates. If you were building a premium title, you had to, a box. All you could do is raise money from a publisher. Today, there are a lot more alternatives, right? So you have pockets of capital from strategics, but again, that'll bridge the gap between what is needed to take a game to be really successful. So I think some of those things are in motion, and I think it just depends on how people can come together to make that, to accelerate that change.
I'll add one more point. Having invested in Europe and North America, there's a culture of knowledge sharing that exists in markets which really helps younger developers, right? In Finland, for example, a Supercell, a Rovio, a Future Play, etc. They'll all kind of do these open nights where these founders and their teams are often doing, open sessions about, what their metrics are, and they're building very much in public. Similarly, in the UK, SpaceApe would do, these nights weekly, on a monthly basis, where they would take, younger game developers through, okay, what does data stack look like? What does big data look like? How do you target users? And I feel that's something that's, as a subculture, is something that could be done from the ecosystem. In fact, one of our portfolio companies, Bombay Play, started a developer community for game devs to socialize on a monthly basis, where they do game jams, where they do QA. And I think that's a step in the right direction. We need more of the veteran entrepreneurs now to be part of those circles and to start taking those initiatives to, help younger developers, first-time entrepreneurs to really build in the open.
Keerti, if you're comfortable, I'll throw a question to you. Exactly this, right? You've been on this journey, right, where you started off, you had figured everything out. What is it that you wish you knew better, or perhaps you think the investor ecosystem could have done better for you to have learned so you could, just make everything a better match? What's the last few years gap been like?
Yeah, I think one problem was the inhibitions part, right? Where, having the belief in the Indian market potential for spending. I think India was largely being viewed as a download market. And that is where I think there was one bit of a barrier where it took a while to transition that, there is actually massive, massive potential out there in the country, which is not just ad-driven, right? People would spend on entertainment. And I'm glad now that, so many people have actually seen this happen, that their conviction has gone up. And the moment there is more conviction from the investment side, it kind of encourages the entire startup ecosystem, entrepreneurs, people looking at the industry with a different lens. That, we are chasing something big, massive. We are not just making a game out of a small room and just saying that, okay, people will play. So I think that way, there's been a lot of evolution that has happened. And looking back, I think what we could have done is data speaks, it's true. But when it comes to game, it is also about immersion and entertainment. So you look at data, but you also rely on your gut. And gut is a lot scientific, actually. You learn it from experience. It's not a random feeling. So I think numbers make sense a lot, but you also got to be, have that belief that, yes, what I'm experiencing, what I have known, can work and can scale.
No, that makes sense. Be scientific about data and be scientific about your own feelings. So on that note, time's up for us. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but do we have time for questions?
Doesn't look like it.
We can take one question. All right, make it count. One question. It's got to be the best question. Are you sure? Okay, go. Somebody get that gentleman a mic, please.
Thank you. We are in a very unique position globally. Both public and private equity markets are in some sort of a funding winter. But if you even look at a case like Klarna, which is a big BNPL's Swedish firm.
Sorry,
right?
could you speak up?
Yeah. So Klarna was a big fintech from Sweden. It's an 85% value down round in its latest fundraise. So I was just wondering whether the gaming ecosystem is suffering from a similar funding winter. early stage or maybe later stage? I've been here the first day today. I didn't get that impression, but I thought maybe you guys would put some color on that.
I wasn't very clear the question. I think it's just more on the echo.
Sorry, okay, I'll rephrase. The question is whether the gaming sector is suffering from the same kind of funding winter that the other tech subsectors are suffering from at the moment. And I'm talking about both public as well as private equity.
Perfect. I think Kartik will give us a global perspective.
So I think, look, so overall, if you look at 2021 was an exceptional year, even for gaming, as it was for many other sectors, right? And 2022, really this thing started sort of slowing down, or perhaps sort of late Q1 onwards. And, you know, right now, late stage fundraising for late stage companies is getting a lot harder because that's closest to the exit. So what happens to the equity markets impacts any investor's outlook and what you're underwriting for the exit, right? So, but as you start going more to the early stage, I think it's the effects are much more driven by the industry. So is it going to be the same level as 2021? No. 2022 the overall levels probably are higher or at par with 2020. 2023 is going to see more slowdown because right now it's like a backlog of deals that you're starting to see. So the numbers, that's how they'll trend. But all I'll say is that, you know, late stage remains challenging as the outlook around equity markets, not so much, you know, it's one, you need to have some certainty baseline to when you're a late stage investor and starting to look at 3 years as an exit, maybe 2 years. So perhaps next year as things start to stabilize a little, you will see that recover. But on the early stage, what I can say is that, you know, mobile, free to play, given the challenges around IDFA, India is of course an Android market, so it depends on what happens with Google and their implementation. But that's having an effect on funding. Web3 is still seeing interest, but I think it's gone back to the same metrics or same kind of evaluation as you used to have with gaming, which is, are you building the right game? The infrastructure side of the story is different in the sense that if you're building a platform that's going to enable or a certain enabling technologies, that will be evaluated not too dissimilar to how a SaaS business is looked at, right?
All right, I think we're good. So time for us to wrap up, and I'd like to thank all our panelists who've done a fantastic job, even dealing with the echo. So thank you so much, and thank you for being so enlightening.